Welcome to the Laws of Style, featuring conversations on creativity, fashion, and the law from the leading edge of our economy and culture. Hosted by noted fashion lawyer Douglas Hand.
Welcome to the podcast, The Laws of Style, downloading to you from the offices of HBA, high above Bryant Park in New York City. I am joined today by PR fashion maven, Maguire Steele. Megan, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with the background, really. I like to start at the beginning, somewhat chronologically. Tell us about your early education and how you think that led you into the role that you have today.
Okay. I grew up in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. I went to all-girls Catholic prep school on the main line outside of Philadelphia, Marian Mercy Academy. Our school motto was, "Girls will be girls, but Marian girls will be ladies." And then
what were the school uniforms like?
They were very chic. We had a winter uniform and a summer uniform. The winter uniform was a multi-plaid kilt, and you wore either a yellow Oxford shirt or a yellow turtleneck, navy blue blazer with a crest, penny loafers, navy blue knee socks, or navy blue tights.
Wow.
And then we had the spring-summer uniform was a blue seersucker kilt with a polo shirt and a crest, and then you could add the blazer if there's a bit of a chill. No, white.
Gotcha.
White and light blue.
Okay,
Yeah.
Sorry for that brief interjection.
No, it's a key footnote. So went to Marian, and then I went to Washington University in St. Louis for undergrad, BFA in painting and minors in business and art history. And then I went to Rhode Island School of Design for an MFA in painting and a collegiate teaching certification from Brown.
Oh, wow.
And then I moved to New York immediately after grad school. And I had already secured a job while I was still in grad school working for a public relations agency. I had interned for Luca Luca between my junior and senior year of undergrad at WashU because I was studying fine art, but I always loved fashion, and I knew if I ever wanted to work in fashion in any capacity in New York, I needed to intern. I didn't know anyone in New York. I mean, I'd come to New York in high school for school trips, but it wasn't like I spent a lot of time here, but I knew I wanted to be in New York. So I interned for Luca Luca and actually did a wholesale internship that summer, and then stayed in close contact with the team because at that time that was a big, splashy, well-regarded women's designer ready-to-wear brand, but it was a small team internally. And so then I continued to, after my internship, freelance for the public relations department because my boss moved over to that department, who I initially interned under, and freelance for them all throughout graduate school. So when I was coming to New York and applying for positions, I had a lot more runway show and event experience than most people applying for a position, which was a leg up. And at that time, Luca Luca was doing big, splashy runway shows at the tents at Bryant Park, and Naomi Campbell was walking in the show, and Alucci and Omaira, Maria Carla, Boscona, like all these amazing models. It was still very much like the heyday of New York Fashion Week, so that was a super exciting time.
Right in the park.
Yes, exactly. And also, I mean, the importance of relationships in this industry, and I think really any industry, but especially the fashion industry. The agency that I ended up working for, I was recommended to that position by my friend who I had met as an intern at Luca Luca, who was interning for another agency and had gone to Columbia, graduated, stayed in New York. And he said, "Oh, well, I'm moving on to this other position. You'd be perfect for my position," and recommended me. And then I went and interviewed. So I literally started working like the week I graduated from grad school, full time in New York.
Well, so another little pivot here. Was it a paid internship? Do you remember?
It was a paid internship.
Okay.
It was $10 an hour.
Okay.
Because I needed a paid internship. So I had this is in 2001. So I mailed packets, cold called all these people and mailed packets, and I was offered internships at the time with Randolph Duke and Vera Wang, but they were unpaid. And my parents paid for my housing and supported me doing the internship, but I needed spending money in New York or some
food. You needed ramen noodles,
some extra.
Yeah.
Although
the
my
$1
parents
slice
are
of pizza.
incredibly supportive and really hardworking, and always put a huge emphasis on education and paid for all my education and all of that, which is a huge advantage in the sense of not having student loans and things like that. So I needed to get a paid internship, and so I tracked down Luca via like a college classmate's stepmother's friend who worked
No
for
LinkedIn
Versace.
in 2001,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
And she referred me to Luca. And so I had other internships lined up, but theirs was paid. So I took the Luca internship.
Got it.
Yeah.
You know, it
Which is uncommon because
Yeah.
we have interns and they're unpaid, but they get academic credit.
Right.
So we usually we do the school forms and all that sort of stuff.
It's a very important component of the industry that we
Yeah,
service,
totally.
the fashion industry, getting that first access point.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that before that, you perhaps weren't sure that what you wanted to do lay within the fashion industry itself. I mean, that's exactly what an internship
Yeah.
can provide, that first exposure to determine, is this for me
Yeah.
or not?
Yeah.
But, you know, on to your advanced degrees, that is relatively rare, I
Yeah.
think, in your
It's
industry,
uncommon.
where I think street smarts, which you certainly have,
Yeah.
but a lot of people get by on just that
Yeah.
and the relationships, which you don't need to go to RISD for.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe speak to that as maybe one of the higher educated people in your industry
Yeah.
and how it's enhanced your ability to perform your service.
Yeah, I think at the time, my dad, my mom was a teacher, and my dad has a master's in social work and was worked in nonprofit and for-profit, and I think his talent was sort of like coming into a program that was failing and making it profitable, or raising the endowment if it was nonprofit, and so they were always big proponents of education and, you know, facilitated for me to go to the best schools that I could, and so my dad was like, you know, after undergrad, you should go to grad school, you should do it now, we can help you now, etc. And so I was still pursuing art at the time and loving fashion. And so that's really a big part of the reason of why I went to RISD so immediately. But I always sort of like kept my foot in the door in New York and kept coming back, would work for the month of winter break. And I think having an MFA has been an advantage in the sense that it makes me distinctly equipped to work with creative people and understand their process, but be able to distill their message to a larger audience. And so I think that's been a strength, because most people working in publications don't necessarily have that degree of a creative background.
Right.
And up until I launched my company, I was still making art. My husband's an artist. I do a lot of work also directly in the fine arts world. So yeah, I think it provided a more global perspective on creative fields, and also a more in-depth knowledge of the interconnectivity of all of those fields.
Yeah, I mean, they're dissimilar services, but
Yeah.
in providing legal services to
Yeah.
to creative people in the fashion industry, I find that one of the areas of special sauce that a lawyer needs to have is perhaps not being creative, but being able to articulate to creatives
Yeah.
and hear what they're saying and put them in the same context and perspective that they put them in. Where if they reference Bill Blass, you know what that means relative to referencing H&M.
Yeah, I think it's also about being able to, for my position, to actually create things as well. I think what's unique about the way in which I work with clients is that oftentimes, like, in a typical public relations relationship, it maybe is more focused on asking the client, what are you launching? Okay, we'll pitch that. And certainly we go through those exercises, but I think from the onset of my company, one of the points of differentiation was always about collaborating with clients to actually create the content, the programs needed, and to ultimately secure the press coverage around it. So the questions are more oriented around what should you be launching, how, when, and where should you be launching it, and then creating the entire program and ultimately securing the media coverage on it. And I think that's something that I did from the onset of having my agency, and even before when I was working, with Rag & Bone, because Rag & Bone was a client from, we really sort of started together. And then they were also a founding client of my agency. And so I went through the process of working with them when it was Nathan, Marcus, and David, through to Andrew Rosen buying in, and them moving into their first office, which was on Bryant Park, and then into their what is still their office on 13th Street and was really pivotal in that development. And so the working relationship was always like dynamic and collaborative and oriented around creating. And I think a big part of that, of having an art background, is being able to have the client give you, it can be as sort of minimal as a few sentences or phrases that you pull out of them, and then you really create a whole program around that. I mean, each client is different. Some people give you more than that, but other people, once you get into a groove and a rhythm and there's a trust, you can kind of literally have conversations, and then I can create entire programs around that.
Right. Well, there is an extreme value, as you know, to the creative director's time, to a designer's time. You know, if
exactly.
it's a founder / head of brand, the amount of time that they really have to make those decisions, even though they want to, let's face it, they want to in your sphere, probably more than mine, but often in mine, with respect to contractual provisions. They simply don't have the time. They're juggling the balls of 4 seasons in the air at once. And so that's a huge benefit to be able to deliver that.
And also for you, I mean, that's the thing, like, I've seen so many clients go through processes where maybe the idea of the deal or the partnership was a good one, but it was just structured so poorly, in which like they didn't monetize it. Like when you sort of come into an existing brand and they have things already in progress, and this or that deal will already be in progress. And so then in that case, we're sort of more weighing in from a PR and marketing perspective, and then we'll develop future programming for them. And sometimes those deals are just not structured effectively, and so they're not seeing the full monetization of them. And I think that's why, it's important to have good legal counsel. And because, some people are creatives, that's not their expertise. Their expertise is the creative, and that's why you have these business-to-business services to really make sure that you're maximizing and monetizing these opportunities so you can stay in business and grow your business and continue to be creative.
Yeah. Well, so early aughts, starting out. When did you form the firm?
So I launched my company August 2008. So it's 11 going on 12 years that I've had the company. I launched with Rag & Bone, Billy Reed, Rogues Gallery, and Flourshine by Jackie Brown were my founding clients. And actually Alex Carlton, who was the founder of Rogues Gallery, which is now the creative director of Filson, and Filson is the Maguire Steele client more recently. And actually another, Doug Berkman, who was the creative director of Berkman Brothers, and founder of Berkman Brothers, is now the creative director of Ren Spooner, who's a current client of Maguire Steele. So there's a lot of longevity of relationships there. We share a lot of clients. Yes, we do. So many.
And people always understand my proclivity for menswear brands. But what about yours? I won't say it's disproportionate in the sense of just, we both know the way the revenues are sliced in terms of overall sales.
So I've always been known for having a specialty in menswear. I think few firms specialize effectively in menswear, so it's an important point of differentiation in the market. And I personally love menswear. My dad is definitely my original menswear inspiration. He's very knowledgeable about product, always emphasized quality, the type of thing where you'd say like, oh, that's a nice sweater. He'd be like, virgin wool, never pills. Or like you'd talk about like, he'd be like, Ventile. Do you know the history of Ventile?
Does he pull a pipe out of his mouth?
No, but he's very well read, and he's both my parents are voracious readers, and so that I would say like, both in different capacities have influenced my interest in fashion and an emphasis on fit and fabric and quality. But so I love menswear, and I love a brand. A lot of the brands that I work with begin in menswear and then launch women's, e-commerce, brick and mortar. Now you have e-commerce, but at the time when that was more transitioning into becoming a bigger part of people's businesses, brick and mortar, and have that sort of diversity and robustness within their own business, or we're growing them in that direction. That being said, it's always funny when you have new business conversations because, I own a public relations agency whose core client base is fashion, and therefore, of course, we do women's wear as well because it's the bulk of the industry. So I launched Timo Weiland, Marissa Webb. I launched women's for Rag & Bone, which has become a huge part of their business. I represented Hellacy, which is a designer women's ready-to-wear brand. So yes, we do women's, but I think it's a point of differentiation that we have such a strong track record in men's.
And the obvious follow-up here is what are some of the more distinct differences from your vantage point on the PR side between the two?
I think that the way the men's customer shops is very different than the women's customer. I think for men, there's more of an immediate interest in how something's made and the materials used and the longevity of the piece. I think the women's customer typically is more interested in newness and trend and novelty. And if they're seduced by the look of it, then they become interested in the quality proposition, whereas I think men tend to start with that. It's interesting. I just signed a new client, Wolf & Shepherd, that we started with on December 15th. It's a men's footwear brand, and it's a dress shoe brand that merges athletic technology for comfort with Italian leathers and proper dress shoe components and puts those two elements together. And it was interesting to see when I announced that I signed them, friends like sort of outside the industry who work in finance or law, but are, have taste and are interested in looking put together, but wouldn't necessarily be considered like hardcore fashionistas, immediately texted me and were like, "Oh, I love Wolf & Shepherd, or I like your new client, or if those shoes are as comfortable as they say, I might need to buy a pair." Another colleague, she was like, "Oh, my husband just bought a pair, and he, works in finance and manages sovereign wealth and was headed to Davos in the desert." So I felt like it was interesting to see that because they're, they have a healthy business, that they're already attracting the customer base that they should want to have. And what resonated about what they were making was the quality and comfort proposition. Because the product, the other thing too is like, if you go through these conversations, some brands, like, they'll lead with technology or some sort of like patented element, but if it doesn't look good, nobody cares. It's like people get to that if it looks good. So like if it looks good and the shoes look good, they do. And then also there's this unique comfort proposition in terms of the wearability. Well, then that becomes a real strength, which is why that product resonates. Whereas if it was just a tech proposition and it didn't look good, maybe that would get some initial interest, but it wouldn't create a business.
Well, and for men in particular, right? If you're talking white collar professionals, who maybe in a business casual environment, but still aren't in a you're gonna spill trends on yourself every 3 months, right? It's still basically some sort of a uniform. To have footwear footwear for the white collar professional hasn't changed much. And if you can hide the technology, so to speak, and put it in a shoe that is affordable but not a cheap proposition.
The price point's like $250 to just under $400.
Because shoes last
so
forever.
It's well priced. It's not inexpensive, but it's well priced, especially for the quality proposition and the look. And
you don't have to look like you're in trainers,
Yeah.
which is more and more men are, jumping on that sneaker. I'm not gonna say bandwagon, but they're jumping.
And they do make sneakers. They make proper sneakers,
right? Well, they have
too, and they have a hybrid coming. But we'll get into all that in 2020.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think you're starting from the right standpoint. So back to the aughts versus today, and I know we're really maybe talking 2 decades, but we're close to the end of this one. What differences have you seen? Obviously the huge shift in those decades has been at retail. So what differences have you seen from your vantage point?
Well, I think, when I first started working with Billy Reid, that first 5-year period from 2008 to 2013, which was really what we achieved was industry landmark results, and I think is a good example of also a shift in the market. So at that time, when I signed Billy, he was truly a Southeast regional brand, and we were taking the business from regional to national and international. And in that first 5-year period, he won every industry award accolade. He won GQ Best New Designer, CFDA Vogue Fashion Fund in the same year, and then won CFDA Menswear Designer of the Year. We launched wholesale, achieved profitability, did really innovative runway shows. So totally created a presence for him at New York Fashion Week. Celebrity dressing, just all the layers. But that, and that first 5-year trajectory is what took the business to $30 million and profitable. So it's not that aspects of that development wouldn't occur to get today, but I think that sort of the succinctness of being able to go through an awards trajectory as a layer to development, opening stores, launching wholesale, growing e-commerce, like elements of all those things can exist. But it was, I think the approach is different now because the market is so much more dispersed. And so, I mean, I've done a lot of runway shows and presentations over the years, and I think that, you know, one of the questions you had sent me in advance was about the cost of showing. And because it is expensive, I would never advise a client to do a show just to do a show. I think that there has to be strategic goals for the show, and therefore you orient the way in which you're showing around that to achieve those goals. So we've done shows where it's really served its purpose in terms of securing key wholesale distribution, of elevating the identity of the brand, giving more people access to it. But I think there's also a whole sort of like slew of non-traditional tactics for that. And one of the ones, even at that timetable, which I think was ahead of the curve, was creating Shindig for Billy Reed, which began as a press trip. So when I first started working with Billy in the first year, I said, you know, I think we need to bring key press to Florence, Alabama, where he's based, so that they could experience his specificity of place, what inspired him on a day-to-day basis. And at that time, to really dispel stereotypical ideas of the South and perhaps a caricature that people had in their mind as opposed to a direct experience. You know, Florence, Alabama is truly a small town in North Alabama. It's famous for music because Fame Studios and Muscle Shoals is there, Aretha Franklin and Rolling Stones, but it's truly a small town. So I created Billy Reed Shindig as a press trip. We did the first one in 2009, bought key press there from Elle and other top tier publications, and had them do coverage of it. We had a dinner at Billy's home and that was sort of the early stage of involving food and music as two sort of like touchstones of the brand. You know, fast forward now, Shindig lives on and has been in existence for over a decade. It's a 3-day annual festival. The city of Florence is now involved, and it is an experience and its own life force that involves fashion, music, art, community, and food, and those partners evolve and change each year. So that was a non-traditional key component of the development that I think is still even more relevant for brands today in terms of creating experience. I think some of the other elements of like showing and awards are not things in the current climate that you can lean on as heavily. But I think the element of introducing a client to key players in the industry or just key partners outside of the industry that can really elevate brand awareness and plant seeds is still very relevant.
Yeah. Well, so you're obviously the gatekeepers have changed, right? You know, we just look at publications that are still standing on skeleton staff, essentially. So getting editors in the room still important, but there aren't as many. Getting buyers in the room still important, but there are brands that are digitally native that don't have wholesale accounts. And so those typical demarcation points of, okay, the brand is established and people are aware of it, are maybe more difficult to rely on because those two components
I think the targets have just changed, and you have to be savvy and able to pivot and also identify what is critical on a client-by-client basis. So, for example, one of my current clients is Savas, which is designed by Savannah Yarborough. She went to Central St. Martin. She has a BFA in menswear. She launched in January 2015 with True Bespoke. She has her own atelier in Nashville, Tennessee.
Beautiful jackets.
Yeah, beautiful. And then in November 2018, she launched Made to Measure, knowing that she would move into ready-to-wear and kind of using Made to Measure as a means of really honing in on the styles and the fits that she would offer for ready-to-wear. And then in October 2019, we just launched men's ready-to-wear and 3 key women's ready-to-wear exclusives. So she continues to offer bespoke and made to measure in her atelier in Nashville and also by appointment in New York and other cities. And then, you know, we're looking at 2020 planning for her. And so, you know, what's important for her business is now for her, I'm moving into securing strategic partners in hospitality and spirits that, because she is a self-financed designer brand, can underwrite some of the initiatives that we would like to execute in 2020 in terms of event programming. So bringing on a key hospitality partner or a partner, interestingly, in interior design that could sort of host her trunk show series in key regional cities like Boston, Chicago, San Francisco, Atlanta, Dallas, and those kinds of markets, and then creating an experiential element through spirits like a Casa Dragones or something along those lines that would, again, also underwrite the cost and allow us to also showcase her taste and curation and point of view.
Right.
So like a lot of what I'll do for her is also development oriented, and then we would also secure media coverage around those experiences.
Right.
And then still doing all the day-to-day, like for her launch, securing features on Women's Wear Daily and Gear Patrol and Inside Hook. Like, when you have conversations with clients, they'll say, like, new business conversations, I feel like sometimes people will come in and say, like, well, what's the one thing that I should be doing? And it's like, well, it's always about being in all the right places at all the right times. It's not about being anywhere and everywhere. It's about being in the right places at the right times. Yeah. Because that connectivity and consistency is what gives the sensation of this brand being, one to watch and showcases point of view. And how do we create and curate point of view that reflects this brand identity? Yeah. I think it's just a critical component of brand building.
Right. Well, so back to, I articulated the two people that would traditionally be in, back to the aughts, the house, the editors and the buyers.
Yes.
And then maybe the third leg of that stool was always the celebrities.
Yeah, that definitely was a time period where celebrity front row was already becoming a key component. Like Luca would have really splashy,
well, so for the uninitiated,
yes.
What is or was celebrity seating, and then we'll transition into what does celebrity mean today, because it's shifted.
Yeah. I think historically, in the entire time that I've been doing runway shows, so like early 2000s through to now, like we've always secured celebrity attendance and cultivated celebrity relationships and been doing celebrity dressing throughout the year. So, when I was working with Richard Chai, I always joke that I introduced Richard to the Jonas Brothers. This is when Jonas Brothers were still together, when they broke up. So then now Joe and Richard are really good friends. But that initially came about through them attending Richard's runway shows and facilitating that introduction and dressing them. And then they developed like an actual friendship. But I think that happens a lot if you do it in the right way, because you should be sort of bringing together people that, yes, are going to create visibility for the brand, but that also make sense for the brand.
Like-minded and simpatico.
Exactly. Yeah. So that component in my work experience was always there. I think what's shifted is in the last few years is how we leverage celebrity coverage to secure day-to-day coverage as well. So like all of the media outlets, they're beholden to traffic as well. And so whether it's a shopping story or a product story, for the media outlets, the more it's tied to celebrity, the more views that they get. So I think a lot of what we do in terms of celebrity is, when I approach celebrity dressing, I sort of think of it in three categories, which are quintessential brand ambassadors, people who truly reflect the brand identity. Then there's commercial ambassadors, people who still make sense for the brand, but have a very relevant, high visibility project launching a new series, a film that's going to create a vehicle for coverage, and these people still make sense for the brand. And then there's this layer of like word of mouth influencers, like people who are never going to be in the pages of Us Weekly, but who have great cachet and within their circles of influence, and who will sort of spread the word. And they're important to dress as well. And then you want to sort of like look at those three categories and curate a really strategic group around that and continue to evolve it. I also think it's important, like, for me to sort of like be worth my salt in celebrity, I have to be able to like dress Gwyneth Paltrow and Beyonce and Rihanna, who we do dress, and but I also think it's really important to cultivate talent and dress people ahead of the curve, because one, those are relationships, those people remember that you supported them early on before everyone else was beating down their door. And also by doing that, it creates point of view for the brand, to know that we dressed this person when they were nominated for their first Tony Award.
Right.
And, now they're a Broadway star and also in 6 other films and on HBO and Showtime. And that there's, you you build that relationship over time, and those layers all create sort of like public facing narrative for the brand. So I think that's a layer. And then, what we do now is also, or have for the last several years, is that when we dress someone through that sort of like lens of curation, we're immediately leveraging the dressing and pitching it out for other coverage. So whether that's like GQ Best Dress of the Week or Vogue.com Best Dress of the Week, it also can be leveraged for Daily Mail features, for shopping features that are just, and also a lot of times publications now ask like, well, who's wearing the brand? Especially on the women's side. I mean, the men's side, men's celebrity style has become more of a topic in recent years, but especially on the women's side, it's like, well, who's wearing the brand? That's one of the first questions that like a women's editor will ask.
Right. Well, and today, a follower in some ways.
Yeah.
And
also those images are multi-use because you're pitching them for media coverage, you're circulating them on social media. They can, depending on how they're structured, be used for like e-commerce mailers and things like that, depending on the terms.
Yeah.
And so I think the other component is that like everything we're doing has to be sort of looked at through the lens of an integrated strategy. And I think previously, a decade plus, 15 years ago in the industry, there was a different like rollout strategy because it was like, okay, you're going to give this exclusive to long lead, you're going to hold until short lead breaks, and then you're going to roll out as follows. Like that strategy is no longer relevant in that traditional way.
Yeah, and it was formulaic.
And hasn't been for a long time.
Yeah, and because it was formulaic, I mean, I guess the perception now would be it's easy. I mean, I guess somebody needed to develop that formula.
Yeah.
But putting that aside and back to sort of what you said about, someone before the curve, the other benefit to that, I would imagine, is also that shrewd consumers, and these days, what consumer isn't shrewd, I think has a better feeling when it's a slightly known actor or actress, because they figure it was organic as opposed to a huge name where they figure, all right, they gave them a closet full of clothes as well as $250,000, and yes, now they're in the brand.
I mean, that's the thing too. Like in the entire history of the company, I've never done a paid celebrity. We've never done paid celebrity endorsement.
Yeah.
Like I've never paid anyone to attend a runway show. I've never paid them to wear the clothes. Like it is because I have a curated client roster, and so it's all relationship driven.
Yeah. And that definitely was old playbook and old formula.
Yeah.
And
I mean, that being said, other brands that are commercial might be in different positions.
Yeah.
But that's just not necessarily it's much more relationship
would
driven.
alienate, I think, a lot of your clients too.
Yeah.
So still on the subject of celebrity, I mean, what are your thoughts about the influencer? And I say that maybe there's an implied value judgment that the influencer is not a celebrity, but that distinction.
I think they are in their own right. We do a lot of influencer placement and social media placement. Again, the bulk of it is through loaning and selective gifting. We do gift. I like to sort of gift as a thank you as opposed to just throwing a lot of product. And I think that, some people have a gifting strategy where it's just like they just throw a bunch of product out and see what sticks. I think my gifting strategy is much more tailored. But we do gift strategically. And we've done a little, for certain brands, a little bit of paid social, but it's usually tailored around a very specific launch where it has more to do with wanting to guarantee that the post goes live at a certain time with several other posts concurrent. Because when you're doing something based on relationship, it's goodwill, and based on the relationship what the person feels comfortable doing and is likely to do. But you can't guarantee the client that this post is going to go live in this format because it's not a paid post.
Right.
So we've done a few things where we've done paid for account takeovers tied to strategic events or collaboration or key product launches and things like that. But I wouldn't say it's like the bulk. It's not the bulk of what we do. If I had a client who's business was oriented around that at the present time, and that strategy made sense for them and was needed, it's certainly something that we have all the relationships to put in motion and could negotiate effectively. But I think also now that social media is so algorithm driven, you need to be spending a lot of money to like break through. So I think it's a balance of like, well, what's the budget? And is that the best use of the funds right now? Like, do you have enough budget to allocate to that it's really going to be the best use of your money? Okay, if you do, then let's talk about it, and let's talk about the best way to maximize that spend.
Right. Well, so an important thing that you do for clients, and I think any service provider does for clients who don't have a limitless budget, and which client these days does, is sponsorship, procurement.
Yeah.
So maybe speak to that, because all this stuff is expensive.
Yeah.
And you would know how to promote a brand if money were no object, but money is always an object. So sponsorship, procurement, and how can sponsorship procurement be part of the promotion itself if it's done properly?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is also another kind of shift in the industry, because I think this money is harder to come by. But let's say circa 2008 to and before that, but I'm just using my own company timeline as the barometer, but I was doing sponsorship procurement before that. So 2008 to, let's say, like 2014, there was a lot of like funding available if you could put forth a smart strategic partnership. And a lot of times what people are buying into, like the partner sponsors, they're buying into the media coverage. So what's asked of the client in that situation is like maybe just like to show up to an event and to like license the use of like one print for something, and then like the rest of the deliverables are really about coordinating on the PR front. So maybe I'm not directly responsible for securing the coverage, but I'm creating the vehicle for the coverage, and what they're buying into is the amount of coverage we've already secured for the client.
Right.
So I've always had an agent clause in my contract, and I charge 20% commission of any financials or gross proceeds that I broker on behalf of clients, because that work has to be monetized because it's above and beyond the retainer agreement.
Right.
That being said, most clients are very on board for that because it can be very lucrative.
It's not only cost neutral, if it's just a commission, they're clearing
a substantial amount of money. And so historically, I've done partnerships with eBay, with FN Vodka, and those kind of partnerships are, upwards of $100,000. And they also provide value for the client if you structure them properly, because that's just the fee to the client and to us. In addition, that doesn't include what I'll broker in for them to cover event costs or added value. So to create vehicles for exposure that the client might not be able to afford directly. So in that time period, I mean, that was a really lucrative revenue stream, and was facilitating exposure, and also, frankly, for a lot of clients, the ability to even show, because it was substantially monetizing. I think that there was definitely a period of time in the interceding years where that money was a lot harder to come by. I think, but that being said, I think it's all about the approach and what you can make happen. So I don't think it's about just chasing money from anyone and everyone. It's like, what we'll look at, for example, with Savas is like, what partnerships really make sense for her and are going to speak to her brand identity, and therefore will provide real value to the partner brand. And also, like, what's the crossover in consumer audience, and she's going to be appealing to people like that because she's an emerging designer brand. So it makes sense. I mean, you also go through the transition with clients where, like, you have to have conversations and be like, look, everybody knows you're making a lot of money now, so you can't like present as like the upstart that just needs a little boost to get there. And then I think the way you approach partnership like shifts and becomes about a different proposition. So like in June 2019, we launched a collaboration with Ren Spooner and Todd Snyder. And Todd's a good friend and a client of yours. And Ren Spooner is a Hawaiian heritage brand. They've been in business for almost 65 years. All of their prints are original and hand painted. So basically Todd used some Ren Spooner fabric in his runway show. Ended up doing it in, I think, 10 or 12 looks. It looked really great, and decided to move forward with production of it. And then Maguire Steele secured all the press coverage for the consumer launch in June 2019, and it was really successful. Todd did a shop-in-shop in his store. Then I brought in a partner called Live Unlimited, which is a company that provides all of the resident amenities and concierge services to the best luxury buildings in the city, and did like an Aloha Friday happy hour with them geared to those residents. That's really more of like a consumer marketing initiative. It wasn't something that we secured press coverage on, but it was a valuable layer. So I think then you start to look at like what are the other value add propositions, as opposed to just like when it's an emerging designer brand and they really need cash assets, you know, like with Wolf and Shepherd, like the partnership development for them will probably more be about strategic collaborations, but also like their layer of like influencer and celebrity is going to be athlete heavy, and we're going to do a lot of athlete dressing, but we're also going to look at like sort of the professionals that are their customer base and should be their customer base, and how we reflect that back through experience. So like that's interesting to me. Like that's exciting to be able to build, you know, and not just sort of like inherit what's happening, but ideally I want to sign in a way where like what I'm inheriting is good to begin with.
Well, so as you move along that spectrum between sponsorship and collaboration, and often the sponsorships are still called collaborations, but let's face it, when it's Samsung and some small designer, it's a sponsorship.
Yes.
And when it's small designer X small designer, you know, but in two different categories, it's a collaboration. And there's no money. So how do you deal with that from the commission standpoint, where maybe you've put an amazing collaboration together, but there's really no money in it?
Well, the ones that I would pursue wouldn't. If I'm representing the emerging designer brand, I'm looking for a brand that's bigger than them, that is going to provide new consumer audiences, but is also going to monetize. Like I wouldn't, the brand can sort of pursue, the way the terms are structured, it doesn't preclude them from securing their own partnerships and saying like, we're doing this, and then we'll just focus on whether or not that falls into our scope of work for promoting it. But what I'm going to pursue is going to be something that can be monetized.
Yeah. Well, makes sense.
Yeah.
You may want to think flat fee for those collaborations, which are really just, you know.
I'm open to that, Doug. I'm open to your advising. It's about diversified revenue streams.
Right. Well, so let's pivot a little bit. Yeah. Although we've talked about runway shows.
Yeah.
New York Fashion Week.
Yeah.
You know, it's been a topic. It's been a punching bag, I think, for the past 12 to 24 months.
Yeah.
What do you think the future of New York Fashion Week is? I'll just leave it as open-ended as that.
Well, I mean, to be honest, I haven't really been doing like shows the past few seasons. I mean, historically I'd be doing 7 shows plus parties and events every season. And I think it's a combination of factors. The clients that I was working with, it didn't make, I mean, I guess we were doing Hellacy like through 2018. So we were doing shows for them. And we were doing shows for Hellacy because the shows were providing value. Like the last show that I did for Hellacy was part of a 2-part event series. So Sylvie has like a ladies poker club. She plays poker once a month, and each woman in the club hosts. And so I wanted to do a story around that for a long time, and had sort of been seeking the right outlet for it.
Did you have to lose a bunch of hands to?
No, I didn't. But
or are you
I'm
a
pretty
player?
good. I'm
yeah,
pretty good.
I could see you.
I'm pretty good.
Yeah.
So basically, I had known that from the start of the working relationship. She was a client for 3 years, and when I first pitched it out, you know, all the fashion publications, I love it, but the story would just sort of sit. It was like they didn't know how to do it or where to put it. So I was like, let's table this and really like build brand identity through these other channels, and we'll revisit it. And so I ended up doing it as an Elle Decor entertaining story that was really about a message of female empowerment and how these women have been playing poker together for the last 7 years and supported one another through the sort of trials and tribulations of family and work. And it was a great feature. And then I said to Sylvie for that season, because that story ran in May and we were going to be showing Resort in June. And I said, let's carry that thread through. And for Resort, let's have a dinner and play poker, because, you know, people get invited to dinners all the time, and that's not a story in and of itself. So let's sort of continue the momentum of this, you know, press piece that we just ran, and also you're trying to build out some personality for the brand and the designer, and this is a good sort of means of showcasing that. So we did it in the chef's private dining room at Legacy Records, and had the dealer that she uses for her monthly club. I curated a new group of sort of attendees, so it was a mix of artists and curators, because art is also a reference point for her, and she collects. So artists, curators, some influencers, some models. We dressed everyone for the event. So also like the event imagery reflected that back in the way in which like the clothes are worn, the women who are wearing the clothes.
Right.
And she was hesitant at the time, you know, and it was a huge hit and everyone loved it. She had so much fun. They ended up playing through dinner and then it was featured on Elle.com. And then the follow-up event to that was that we did the runway show at Legacy Records as well. And it was the first runway show in that venue in the second floor bar, and did it sort of in a very like European style because Sylvie's French and Japanese. And, you know, so the models, the bar created the straightaway. They wove through the rooms. It had incredible like built-in decor. So again, being smart about how you choose your environments, like that had incredible set design that we didn't have to go in and pay for and create, because I also produce typically produce all the shows that I work with and subcontract the vendors. And then, you know, got incredible reviews on Vogue.com, Vogue Runway and Women's Wear Daily, and even Vogue like commented about the format and the setting and how evocative it was towards the brand identity in the collection that season. So like to me, that kind of show is super rewarding to do because we're building the narrative and we're making sure that everything we're doing speaks to that and shares something new or something that you should know about the brand. So to do a show like that is rewarding. To do a show to just do a show, I don't think really does much for anyone at this point. So, you know, in the last year, I actually haven't done any shows, largely because I wasn't super motivated to pursue show-only work. And the brands that I was representing on a retainer basis, it didn't make sense for their business to show. That doesn't mean we won't revisit it on a case-by-case basis, but, like, I think that there really has to be purpose for the show.
Were you in favor of a separate Men's Week?
Yeah, I mean, I was, and we participated heavily in New York Fashion Week Men's because I, you know, handled show services for Ovadia and Sons from their very first show to their second to last show, and then they did one show after and stopped showing. But all the shows in between, which was definitely one of the best, you know, most in-demand shows of New York Fashion Week, and also did shows for EFM Engineered Promotion, which that was a good example of how a show can serve a strategic purpose because they were at the sort of kickoff of New York Fashion Week Men's, and that really at the time, the show very directly led to Saks picking them up as their first like major key wholesale account. Department store wholesale account that also is at a designer price point and the sort of right positioning. And then also from that, I brokered a collaboration with Dockers that we did that came out of Dockers' support for the venue that they showed in. So they got a venue and a fee and did a strategic collaboration, and that came with programming. So, you know, for them, showing was productive. I think with New York Fashion Week Men's, it's challenging to get the audience from Europe. It's much easier to hop, skip, and jump from, you know, London, Paris, Milan, and there's a convenience factor there that, like, you know, the travel is up against to fly to the U.S. And so I can't say that I'm gonna miss it, honestly, because
it's a ton of work for you.
It feels like it's never. It starts to feel like it's. I love Fashion Week, but it also starts to feel like it's never not Fashion Week, and like. If I'm feeling that fatigue, I think everyone else is feeling that fatigue. It's like, when isn't it Fashion Week somewhere, you know? So I think now the shift that's been made with grouping it with resort, because really the timetable issue too was like in February, it's still pretty close together. So it's like, it was really the separation of July to September and the huge gap that creates for like buyers. That was a hurdle. So I think the current format that the CFDA has moved into makes a lot of sense. And I think brands will be able to address that as a more strategic proposition for how they brand build.
Well, and they are a ton of work and a ton of money. I'm mindful that when you produce shows, I mean, you're there, boots, literally on the runway. I won't say the ground. And taking charge, obviously, as you have to in those rooms. Those are rooms full of big egos, and they don't all fit in the room, and somebody needs to herd cats. How important is it to you for your clients to see you, not your underlings, not your agents, but you in there taking ownership over the process?
I mean, I think for me, it's like never not been the case because I've never had a huge team.
Well, you could get 12 interns.
Yeah, but they wouldn't know who anybody is.
Exactly. Well, that's what a lot of PR firms do,
we
though.
We have great interns, but like, I mean, I've had many great interns over the years who have gone on to great success in the industry.
Well, the good ones go on.
You know, and that
and the
sort
ones
of thing.
who are tourists.
So I mean, I definitely have utilized interns, and like as a small business, you have to also like cultivate talent. But you have to, when you're doing a big show, like you have to have a certain amount of people on the floor who know people by sight. Yeah. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up for like an issue to occur. Yeah. And when other agencies do that, and then there's no one else on the floor who knows who anyone is, something's going to happen, and then that designer's probably not going to book that person if they hear about it again. So I don't think I've ever been in a position. I've always been a presence on the floor.
Well, and crikey, you know the fashion lawyer when he walks in. So if you go that low, you know where I am on the food chain in terms of fashion weeks. I mean, you know everybody in the room.
Very VIP.
And I should. The caveat, of course, is I would never advocate unpaid interns doing jobs like that to any clients because it's also. I mean,
we have
liability.
interns, and we would do. Like day of with Lim, but as ushers. Like, so I would use them to be like placed between each station and, directing people to section A or section B. But yeah, I mean, I think also like it becomes, you have to be doing a lot of shows to like also warrant that staffing like year round. Yeah. And, yeah, it's a challenge.
Yeah. Well, so menswear brands, women's wear brands, we have seen an influx of unisex brands, gender fluid offerings where there's no designation whatsoever. Mm-hmm. Do you think that that's a future of fashion, or is that just tapping into some trend that is maybe current today, but we won't see it last?
I don't think it's a trend per se. I think, I've always loved a borrowed from the boys look, and I definitely wear a lot of menswear pieces within my own wardrobe. And I think inclusion is important and should be part of like any business's ongoing agenda initiatives. Mm-hmm. I don't think that like the gendered element of clothing though needs to go away entirely, because I think, fit is really a really important key component of looking good. Yeah. If something doesn't fit well, it doesn't matter how much it costs, it's not going to look good. And, there's a difference between something that's intentionally oversized or deconstructed, et cetera. But when you're talking about suiting, and like if I'm going to buy a suit, I want a suit that's like tailored to my body and is going to like fit and flatter me in the best way possible. And if you're getting a suit, you want a suit that's going to fit and flatter you in the best way possible if it's meant to be a tailored piece. So there is specificity to that. Yeah. I think probably one of the reasons that Savas is like resonating so much with people is because it is a return to sort of like quality and authenticity. She works with the best tanneries in Italy. All of her leathers are proprietary and developed, but also she's providing an experience for people. And I think amongst the sea of like direct-to-consumer brands and niche products, like that ability to actually like connect and have something created personal for you that's meant to be in your wardrobe for a lifetime is a big point of differentiation and draws people in. And she's really then honed her fits out of that like bespoke experience. That being said, like there's still great sort of like dialogue within that, because one of my favorite pieces from Savas is the Lowry, which is a suede. Well, it can be in suede or leather. It can be in any skin because you can choose. But it's a snap front men's shirt, and it's in the men's ready to wear collection. But I had it made for me, made to measure. Mm-hmm. So I think there's like, I could have just gotten the men's in a larger size and worn it oversized. And that way I opted to have that men's style made for me, made to measure. So it was a bit more tailored in the body.
Yeah.
So I think it's more about like that kind of conversation of like what you want to wear and how you want to look. And like, I don't think that there should be parameters. I think men can buy things from the women's section and women can buy things from the men's section. And maybe it's about the fact that those sections don't necessarily need to exist in a traditional setting. It's more about your shopping experience and what speaks to you. But I think you always want to have the option to have something tailored to you and that like, fits or flatters your body in a specific kind of way.
Yeah. Well, so not necessarily clients aside, but anybody on the table, who are some brands that you appreciate either from a design perspective or a customer engagement perspective these days?
So personally, I really have been wearing a lot of Petar Petrov, who's a Vienna-based designer, and it's a full ready-to-wear collection, but I really love his dresses. I think they're just like unique and beautifully made. Always gets a big response when I wear them, and it's also easy for when you're traveling for business and you just like need a whole look in one piece. Right. So that's a personal favorite right now. Who's not a client. And then actually the sweatshirt I'm wearing today is from Thakoon's new direct-to-consumer line. Wonderful. All right. And I bought this sweatshirt and a pair of pants, and I just felt like it was well made. It was very well priced. It's like it's $100 or about that. And
did you get it at the store?
No, I bought it online. Okay. I bought it online, and
the store's a pop-up, I think.
Yeah, so So I thought that was interesting because it was clean and it was well made, but still forward in terms of design and very well priced, and it's sort of everything held up, which is important. For shoes, I pretty much exclusively wear Gianvito Rossi because they're beautifully made and they have the ever elusive 41.5 size, which is my Bigfoot shoe size, but it also runs a bit more narrow. And so, there's things like that. There's things that work for you and that you kind of like stick with. And then like I'll mix in sort of newness and other elements. A lot of times too, if I'm interested in a brand as a potential client, I will buy something from the brand and wear it first and like see how it goes.
Everything about
And then when I reach out to them, then I can say, I bought this piece and I loved it for this reason. And this is what I think is interesting about your business. I mean, I will say the other big shift in the industry is probably up until the last 2 years. Like I really never did any like proactive outreach. Like all of my client base was so referral heavy. Right. And I think that shifted in the sense that like editors used to function as gatekeepers, and so many of my best clients came through editor referrals. And I just think that the publishing industry has changed so much that that's not the case. And I think a lot of the way in which people find you is that they, go to your website first, they go to your Instagram account first, and then they call you. Mm-hmm. So I honestly, for 10 years I had a landing page that was just like, if you know, and here's the contact info. And then only in the last year did I actually like add any information to my website.
Very speakeasy.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
So I find now that like I am doing more outreach, but also like Wolf and Shepherd was recommended to me through my client Faraday, and Alex Faraday recommended me to them. So, it's always about the mix. You have to move with what is happening in the market, but I think good old-fashioned human connection is still important.
Absolutely. Well, so Thakoon top. Let's. It's time because you introduced it for really what you're wearing.
Yeah.
Really for the benefit of people who are merely listening and not watching us on YouTube. Okay. But what else do you have on here today?
So today I'm dressed pretty casually because the weather's miserable.
It's probably the coldest day of the year, and we're almost at the end of the year.
Yeah. I'm still wearing a 4-inch heel, but like those are like my running around shoes. And also I've been sick. So I'm wearing Gianvito Rossi boots, frame.
In seasonal burgundy.
Yes. Yeah. And then frame denim jeans, a Thakoon sweatshirt, and then I'm wearing a Bespoke Savas leather trench coat that's belted with a removable silver-tipped mink collar. Ooh.
I think maybe we should pull that into the shot.
Yeah, it's a very major
through the magic of editing.
Yeah.
And look at that. So, beautiful interior lining. Contrast, is that purple?
Yes.
That's gorgeous.
Purple. And she offers chain stitch embroidery. With
She
all her
offers
pieces,
chain
so you
stitch
can have,
embroidery. Wow.
you can have artwork or initials, or literally anything you want chain stitched into the interior. And then this is the collar, which is removable.
The collar is gorgeous and
Little bit of a
removable.
matrix element, so
Little
that's what
matrix
I'm
and also a
talking
little
about.
polo coat.
Yeah.
You know, it almost reads
So
like.
mine's just my initials.
And that's your initials. Well, that's gorgeous. Gorgeous piece. When it's not the coldest day of the year, as both partner to a lot of brands and a professional, what are you looking to communicate with the way you dress? In the Laws of Style, which you'll get a copy of at the end of today,
with a personal inscription.
Yes, indeed. But I talk about how, for professional presentation, for an attorney, tailored clothing is really an undeniably great
It's a
vehicle
good look.
for that.
Yeah.
You, in your role as often partner to the brand, often in the weeds of what a brand is doing, but not head to toe in any particular brand. How do you look to present yourself? What do you think is most effective? And we've talked about what you're wearing today, but what do you wear on a day that's not the coldest day of the year?
I definitely dress towards whoever I'm meeting with. So if it's a new business meeting, I would dress towards that client, but in an elevated manner.
Okay.
So I would dress in a way in which, if they look at me, they would feel confident that I could be a brand ambassador, but also in a way that is like perhaps more sophisticated than they would have even thought of themselves. So it's not like you're not sort of talking down to someone, you're sort of like leading the way through your visual communication. If it's a meeting on behalf of a client with an editor, whether the client is or isn't present, but if I'm going to meet with a press person or a potential partner, I'm always going to incorporate a piece from the client's collection that I'm talking about into what I'm wearing. But I will dress, especially with media, I know what a particular editor's personal style is and what's going to resonate with them. So I will incorporate that piece, but dress towards that.
Right.
Because I can't count the number of times, placements I booked when I've worn something and then somebody said, "Oh, I love that. What is it? Oh, it's so-and-so. Can we call it in?" So whether that's wearing my own pieces from the collection or even incorporating samples sometimes as an organic talking point, or, I can think of times when I've had lunch with an editor-in-chief and I know what their personal style is. So I'll wear pieces from my clients' collections, but geared towards what I know they like and is going to resonate with them, because then you don't have to bring it up.
Right.
They say, I love that jacket.
And
Who
know
made
they're
it?"
going to bring it up.
Yeah, because we're all interested
Right.
in style, and we're all interested in communicating our intentions visually and through that mode of communication. So it's it comes up more organically. And so, I think when you work in public relations, you have to have a style point of view, but you also have to be a little willing to pivot and flex towards the conversation. It's different than perhaps other areas of the industry where you might have a really specific uniform or a really clearly identifiable look. I'm sure that people who know me could say there's certain things they know that I'm into, but at the same time, I will shift that towards the person I'm meeting with, because wearing something that is you could end up wearing something that's going to be alienating to them. It could be intimidating, or it could just be perceived as off-brand. Realistically, if I was meeting with a footwear brand, let's say, that that specialized in flats, maybe I would wear heels and say these are the sort of solution to my aching feet, or
Right.
maybe I would wear something that wasn't as directional. I think you just take that into consideration.
Yeah.
So it still would be within my personal style repertoire, but it would be tailored towards that audience.
Well, it's interesting what you've articulated. One of my other guests said, which is points of style are kind of points of conversation starters in some ways. I think it was Dario Calmisi, who's a creative director and photographer, that there's a little access point that allows people very organically in a way that they feel that they've learned something about you that's not obvious,
Yeah.
can engage.
And it's also like, I'm not going to within that wear something that I would never wear
Right.
or that I don't like because I would be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And the idea when you get dressed is to feel confident
For
and
sure.
empowered, I think, and comfortable and really be putting your best foot forward. So again, you do that within your own style repertoire. You want to be dressed in a way, especially when you're wearing clients' clothes. Like, there's been a time or two early on where I would like put myself in a sample and then be like, that didn't work, So you have to, put on the pieces.
Well,
that
but you would never say this, but you're a great clothes horse because you're 6 feet and elegant and
I have the height.
I think your clients appreciate that.
Yeah.
So more on the business. I talk a lot about how the digitally native direct-to-consumer players have pretty radically transformed the industry, and in a good way for consumers.
Yeah.
But that a lot of the smaller brands that have been the bread and butter of this firm and your firm are finding it harder to enter the market because to enter that market, the barriers to entry are so much higher than they were 15 years ago, where all you had to do, essentially, if you were a gifted designer, was create those first samples and get them even just in a lookbook or a presentation, one editor giving you a good word, then the wholesale accounts. And based on the wholesale account orders, you could finance a whole business.
Yeah.
Direct to consumer, there's no wholesale account. There's no big order. There are bunches of tiny little orders. And to get those orders and get the eyeballs on your product, you need to spend a lot these days. Customer acquisition has never been higher, and it's only going up.
But that's why I think also in this moment there's a little bit, I feel like, of almost like a return to PR. Like I think at the peak of social media, there was this sense of like, oh, you don't need anything, but all you need is an Instagram account and a 22-year-old. Like then you have a business. And I think people have sort of like gotten over that and been like, you need a dynamic social media strategy, but you also need other things because it is cost prohibitive to be creating compelling content every day and to be paying customer acquisition. There's other agencies that I have relationships with that specialize in that. And like, they're looking for clients who can come in and spend like $100,000 a month minimum. So I think, at a certain stage, like, I'll have clients who that makes sense to layer into their strategy. But I think prior to that, you can really leverage your press coverage on social media if you do it effectively. So I think it's always about like at what stage in the business you layer in other sort of components and factors. As far as the direct to consumer, it's like easier than ever to launch a website, but at the same time it's so intensely crowded. So yes, I think it's harder and harder to like break through the noise of that in the market.
Well, and know when it's going to resonate.
Yeah.
Does an Instagram post become a pebble in the ocean that you throw? And maybe it was magnificent, right? Maybe it was, but
what you see a lot of brands using too, and I think in direct-to-consumer brands is, and why there is kind of like a renewed interest in PR, a lot of what they're pulling out is like the quotes from publications. GQ says, Forbes says, etc., and using that as sort of like the stamp of approval or the cosign to drive traffic. And then also, I think the other thing is challenging for like emerging designer brands versus brands that have all this like venture capital backing is like the customer service element. Like if you can offer free returns and free shipping and, speed to that, obviously that's a huge advantage to getting people to like try your brand for the first time. But what's going to determine whether or not they continue to come back is like the ongoing experience and presence. And I definitely like worked at a time in the market where it was past the point where stores would pick up a brand because they wanted to introduce a brand to their customers, and they were going to do the heavy lifting. I feel like it was already at a time in 2000, starting to become in 2005 through like 2007, where in that time frame, I would say like a store like Barney's would still pick up a brand as a means of introduction and sort of champion this like eclecticism. I think during that time period though and onwards, especially when I like more, let's say circa 2009 to 2012, it was at the point where brands really were retailers were looking at whether or not a brand had a dynamic press presence because they wanted the brand to drive consumers to their store by the fact that they were carrying that brand. So I think we already saw a shift in that, like, retailers were not going to pick up a brand that didn't have substantial press coverage that was going to therefore be an asset to their retail roster. And so, there's these like waves of transitions of what sort of is prioritized. But I think there's always a need for like a dynamic, cohesive PR strategy, and that also can play into just brand messaging. Like for brands that do have a robust direct-to-consumer e-commerce business and then are moving into opening brick and mortar retail stores, or who have a lot of stores, like what's the cohesion of that? And like, yes, you have a store so anybody can walk into the store at any time and experience your brand, but now you have 14 stores, and is the messaging consistent? And what's the sort of unifying factor in all of your communication? So like the work evolves, which is what keeps it interesting.
No, it's very good. And what's your theory? So Barney's no more. Fred Siegel or Dover Street Market, will they? Is there room for that still experiential shopping experience?
There is, but it has to be rethought. I think what's interesting right now is that so for Wolf and Shepherd, they opened a store in Midtown. It's doing really well.
Oh, where is it?
It's at 400 Madison Avenue between 47th and 48th.
Okay.
Which makes a lot of sense to me because it's near JP Morgan's office, and the customer demographic
That's a
is
whole
really
menswear corridor.
Yeah,
right
and
there.
Turnbull and Asor that I worked with for many years has the townhouse at 50 East 57th Street, so I was very aware of like what that market was. So that store is doing really well for them, and then they have plans to open 3 more stores in 2020, a second location in New York, DC, and then I think a third location that's still to be determined.
Okay.
So obviously having so much experience in opening stores for their clients and going through that sort of growth strategy, I'm a great fit for them in that regard. And it's also an exciting time to be working with a brand that's very financially healthy, that has a great direct-to-consumer e-commerce business, and now understands to sort of continue to grow that audience. They're going to create strategic brick-and-mortar experiences.
Yeah. How much with sustainability, and specifically I'm speaking to environmental sustainability being such a important topic today, how do you get involved in messaging that for brands, and for brands, if there are any that exist that don't address it, how do you advise them?
So there's a great book called Fashionopolis by Dana Thomas, and a lot of current clients and friends are quoted in that book. She came to Billy Reed Shindig in 2016 and interviewed Billy and Savannah from Savas, and KP and Katie McNeil, who are now partners in Imogene and Willie. And then also she explores a lot of like manufacturing components in that book. And it's something that I'm very interested in as well. And I'm actually having a lot of new business conversations with mills and fiber producers, and I've done some work in that space before with Shimaseki, which is a knitting, Japanese knitting company. And so, I think that the way that we're addressing it again is on a client by client basis, because for example, like with Savas, she's using leather, but all of her leather is byproducts of the meat industry, and she knows her factories personally. She knows exactly where the material is coming from. And occasionally people will ask, well, would you use vegan leather? Would you use other types of materials? And her response, and the way that we talk about it to date, is that she's open to it, but these jackets are meant to sort of last a lifetime. She's not using any tanning processes that involve chrome or toxicity. So theoretically, like those jackets sort of go back to ground. They're leather and metal. And also a lot of those vegan materials are petroleum based, which are very toxic. So I think it's about like being very informed. And so she had explored using pineapple leather, and she just was like, it didn't hold up. It fell apart. So until I can find a non-animal based material that I can fully stand behind in the same way that I can stand behind my leathers, I'll continue using leather. But I think she's being conscientious and discerning in all the materials that she's using. So
it's hard. I mean, for consumers, the bright line is the best line, meaning we don't use any any animal fibers in our clothes. That's very, very hard to subscribe to as a brand. And I do agree that the best thing you can do is disclosure. The meat industry is quite large. There are plenty of cow skin available for leathers. It's not that the cows are being killed for the skin alone.
Yeah. But I think it's challenging, and I think the good thing, hopefully, is that the majority is aware that we're all responsible and need to be working towards better solutions.
Yeah.
And so in Dana's book, there's a whole section that's really interesting about various firms, and actually a lot of them were like based in the Brooklyn Army Terminal and locally, that are developing ways to fully recycle fibers. So to take like nylons or cotton and separate them out from blends was the key component, like when fibers are blended together, and be able to like take them back to their raw assets and have them be fully usable again. So like that's super interesting. I just think we all have a responsibility to like stay educated about developments in the industry and ways in which we can participate towards that end. But multiple clients of mine use animal products still, and I still wear leather and wear leather shoes, and so I can't say that, I'm outside of that or...
Right. No, look, being hypocritical would be the worst, but it's not necessarily supporting, say, the meat industry to be using those skins. However, acknowledging that if a better, that the brand is open to, say, pineapple skins or avocado or whatever any of the new products are, I think is important to show an acknowledgement, undoubtedly. So... with your background in art, have you ever represented either artists or anyone in the gallery system? And how does that blend and support the fashion work?
Yeah. So my indirect client base spans a lot of other categories because of all the partnership development, ranging from hospitality and spirits to art and design. Years ago, I produced a collaboration between Timo Weiland and artist Ryan McNamara when he was represented by Elizabeth D., who then went on to found Independent Art Fair. So I've always remained engaged in the art world. And then at the start of 2019, I began representing artist Timothy Maguire Steele and applying the same sort of strategies that I would use for brand management and brand building towards artist management. So producing exhibition opportunities, securing media coverage, and in his case, selling work to collectors. So I produced an activation, for example, at the Surf Lodge where he had participated in Bombay Beach Biennale, which is a residency and did an installation. I showed that work to Jema, who owns the Surf Lodge, so she commissioned an installation for Labor Day weekend. We did a 30-person seated dinner. We did a whole like activation around it that was really successful. And then also doing like lifestyle pieces. So he was just quoted in The Strategist for like his holiday gift cards, so different scales of activation, but consistency of presence and curating that participation. Just sold one of his paintings to collector Beth Rudin DeWoody. That being said, my goal isn't to open an art gallery. It's more to sort of like use the same brand building to get that artist to a point where they could be signed to like a blue chip gallery, and that's somebody who could take their career to the next level in an international capacity.
Or if the gallery system itself, which is under pressure. Yes,
exactly. And that
implodes.
Is going through the same. So it was the right time to do it. It's an interesting time to do it. There's another artist who's named Yassi Mazandi, who I'm working with on a development project that's more akin to like the sponsorship work that I do. And that was also appealing to me, especially in the past year, because it's important to me to stay creatively engaged and to continue to open new channels and new ways in which to work, and that will all filter back into the fashion that I work that I do as well. So I always say that I can make something out of nothing, but if you have something, I can make it that much more. I'm looking for something, so ideally I'm looking with someone who I believe really has the raw talent or a great existing business that they need someone who can really take them to the next level, bring new ideas to the table, enhance and involve the work that they're doing. So like the client base can be varied in that regard. Like at the present time, like there's a really large fiber company that I'm talking to, and like that would be incredibly interesting to work with, and is very much connected to everything else I'm doing.
Well, Megan, we're out of time. That's a wrap. thank you for coming in. I'll sign your copy
Yes.
once we go off screen. But
Okay.
happy
so
holidays
much for
and Happy
having
New Year.
me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye now.
You've been listening to The Laws of Style with Douglas Hand. For more information, go to our website at www.hballp.com. And you can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Hand of the Law. Thank you for tuning in, and stay stylish.